He gave me the thumbs. So let's turn on our mics, make sure I got mine on. All right, thank you. It is 5:15. Let's call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Cool,
Here.
Councilmember Wong,
Here.
Councilmember Nordby,
Here.
Councilmember Schweers absent, Mayor Monge.
Here. Thank you very much. Get a motion to adopt the agenda, please.
So moved.
So move. Councilmember Cole.
Second.
Second, Councilmember Wong. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Topics.
Thank you, Mayor. We have one topic up on the docket tonight, and that is the community center next steps. And I will turn that over to Finance Director Dan Winnick.
Evening, Mayor, City Council members. We're back one more time to discuss the community center next steps. And just kind of as a protocol, what we've done is that just kind of a reminder that each workshop on the community center will follow the format that will give a staff presentation, city council questions and answers. If there's time for public comments, and then we'll talk about the next agenda and have a city council wrap up. This is kind of what we've agreed to as our next steps for information to gather and present and discuss. And as you can see with the check marks, we've gone through all of the clarification on the grant terms. We actually did that again at our last meeting. We had the library here to present their program and their services that they provide to the city. We did an RFI. We reviewed the results of that RFI. And now we're kind of at the step from our last workshop to develop an RFP, which there is a draft that is attached to the document. And you can see kind of some of the next steps and information that we've had agreed on to look at. At this meeting tonight, it's kind of going to be a recap of what staff has put together and presented in the past, and kind of answer some of the questions. There were two components that were asked of our last meeting, and one was of the Wold facility analysis, to kind of look at those on a per year basis. So there's kind of I took their Wold report and I put it into a format where they called them, I think, priority 1, 2, 3s, and 4s. And there's from 0 to 2 years, 2 to 5, and so forth, and we'll get to that next. We're going to review the operating budget. The operating budget was never appropriately ever brought in front of the city council for any discussion. It came out in a newsletter, so we're going to kind of go over that today. And again, it is just an estimate, but I think it kind of shows, at least to me, it shows some indications of if the city council decides to move forward with the community center, there's some parameters in which we need to agree to make it what I look at as a go or no-go decision. Then we're going to review the importance of the library from the presentation that was given from Pang Vang, who is now the director of the Ramsey County Libraries. We're going to review the results again of the RFI for the partnerships at the community center. We're going to touch on a review of the state grant terms of what we've learned from that. And then, again, I don't know what has been presented. It hasn't been presented in my time of having discussions with the community center, but there were some other options that were developed by Wold back in 2022. And there's option A, B, and C, and we'll kind of touch on those. And then kind of do a recap of what I think we've learned, and at least from the discussions that City Council has had so far to date on the community center. And then there is the review of the feasibility study, and that is also attached in your packet. So the first piece that we're looking at is the Wold facility analysis. These numbers and the categories are coming from the report that was presented by Wold back probably a couple of months ago. You can see that they're in the priority 1, 2, 3, and 4, 0 to 2 years, 2 to 5, 6 to 10, within 10 years, and then there's a category that said other. They talk about the categories of accessibility, exterior, interior, site, mechanical system, electrical system, and comes to a total. That's where that $7.3 million that has been discussed in the past, that's where those numbers come. And I know Councilmember Wong had wanted to see it kind of broken out by the years. So I'm going to stop after every slide to give City Council an opportunity to ask any questions or to kind of discuss the information. But this was requested in our last workshop. Any questions, any comments on this?
Are you specifically asking about this slide at this moment? You want us to?
Yes,
dissect
please.
it
Yeah.
and- Okay.
You know, if there's any, questions that are, try to get them at the moment instead of trying to go, at the end of the presentation.
Sure, yeah. So the mechanical systems, my understanding is that the boiler had gone out, and that was something that was replaced in the last couple year or so. Is that included in that number, or is that included elsewhere?
You would have to go into all the I don't have a specific answer. You'd have to go and look at the detail that Wold provided, which is a part of this attachment, to see if they have the boiler included or not. One of the components with, and then I can't answer the question on this, that obviously if you look at the interior of the total for the interior of Wold facility of $356,000, and if you looked at the components that made up that interior, it's basically keeping the interior pretty much the same. The bulk of that was actually, I think, for the gym floor repair. The rest of it was really just some sort of cosmetic changes. There was a couple of ADA changes that needed to be made. It was not configurations of new walls or anything, so depending on whatever type of programming went into that facility, there could potentially be increased costs for the interior of the facility. The reason why I bring that up is because once you start to change walls and that, it does have an impact on your HVAC system. And so I can't answer the question whether the boiler that's sized in that facility would be able to handle if there was a substantial change to the interior and the demand for heating and cooling within that facility. Is the boiler that was replaced in kind that we recently did, would that be adequate to handle the facility as it moved into the future? That would be something that Wold would have to get back to us on.
Okay, so yeah, I guess my question mostly was if the boiler was included in the priority list. So it doesn't necessarily explicitly say. So it would change the calculations if that were the case. Is that my understanding?
If I could add, so there were actually two boilers that were replaced in there, and that total cost was $30,000 for that replacement. I know this process started before those were replaced, so I don't know if it was put in there, but in looking at the total of almost $5 million of the $30,000, it would have made a little bit of a difference, but not a lot for the units themselves, I guess. But we can find that out though, for sure.
Yeah, I think that would be fair to find out whether we would need to make changes to those totals.
Sure.
Question I had too, when it came to the elevator, I know we've had a failure at the elevator, is that correct? Is it catastrophic as far as compared to, would that be, was it just normal maintenance maybe for the thing, but now it sounds like there's something a little more serious?
We were hoping that it was normal maintenance. There was a packing that is around the rod that raises and lowers the elevator itself. We've had one company tell us that they think that the rod itself needs to be replaced. I believe that total cost was about $30,000, $35,000, $34,000, or $40,000. So, but we have another company that said it could actually just be the packing around that rod that raises it up and down, because it was really hard, I guess, and it's not supposed to be that hard. So it could be a more simple fix, but we were kind of waiting to see direction before we dumped a very large amount of money into the elevator of where we were going to go.
Okay.
And I think before that there was discussion that there was no work on the interior, but it seems like there is work being done on the interior. I think that was stated last time.
Minimal, but one was a trip hazard going in from the kind of the lobby area into the gymnasium. There was tin that was sticking up that could be cut on. That was fixed by our Public Works. There was also holes in the floor of the gymnasium that were the old nets. Poles used to go into the ground, so we got cover plates for that. And then the last item was, we were looking into the elevator, and now with the large costs, we're apprehensive to dump that kind of money into it, not knowing for sure which direction we're going to go moving forward.
So it appears to me that between priority 1, priority 2, so that's years 0 to 2 and 2 to 5 years, that the $5.3 million we're receiving from the state and the federal government cover those first 6 years, essentially.
I mean, I'm not going to disagree with that. I mean, based upon the totals, the question then would be, that would come back would be, where would the approximate $1.7 million for priority 3 and priority 4 come from?
Yeah, and I think that's something we had discussed in regards to having a consultant kind of, or a specialist kind of figure out what that could be, those partnerships and whatnot. I think that helps inform it. That's my understanding is why we need to be seeking and why we are putting out an RFP.
Just give me a second. I just want to see what Wold had in detail for the interior. Go down. Let me talk about a summary of interior. Yeah, but detail to that. Yeah, there we go. Go down a little bit further. Yeah, keep going. Yeah, so of the Wold interior, of that total $356,000 amount, $272,800 is remove existing gym floor and replace with new channel floor system. The rest of the items that are on there are relatively small. For example, remove and replace damaged carpet tiles with carpet tiles at 203 office. $900 for the same thing in Office 204, What it's really showing is that there's nothing extensively done in the interior except for that gym floor. So again, the comment that I said prior is that if there were, depending on the program or the use of the facility moving forward, if there's going to be extensive interior, that's not included in the study at all. And normally, you know, if you're looking at whether it's leasing space or doing space, you're looking at $30 to $40 a square foot for tenant improvements. I did a lot of project management in a prior life.
Then, of course, we have the operation of it for that, you know, as far as the city, for the building itself, if there's any other things that come with it. Keeping it clean
and that'll come up in our operational discussion. That'll be coming next. Yeah. Any other questions on this before we move on?
No? Okay. I do. Dan, thank you for putting this in here. Directionally, I get it. They're kind of numbers and spaces. If the gymnasium goes in, we don't have need $200,000. If boilers have already been replaced, but we need to fix the elevator, they kind of set each other off. The thing that I take a look at on here first is the funding that's been made available to us covers us from 0 to the first 5 years. We have 6 years before we have to start. We have 6 years we're able to plan for the next round of the $1.7 million that we talked to as a potential deficit. So it's not necessarily, yes, we need to figure it out, but it's not an urgency. It's not like the money needs to come out of this budgeting period.
I'll have a tendency to kind of agree and disagree with that, and here's the reason why I say that. Hopefully by the next city council meeting, we'll have the completed facility assessment on all of our facilities. I've been stating for quite some time that what's included in our CIP is woefully underestimated and non-inclusive. So hopefully this facility assessment that we get in our facilities will show a true picture of what it's going to cost in time of all of our facilities. No different than how we've been looking at our 10-year financial plans, whether it's the electric fund, water fund, the general fund, and so forth, and more in the enterprise funds when we look at our rates. And Councilmember Cole, you saw this very clearly that, you know, if we have a big gotcha coming out here that we need to fund, and we wait till that year to fund it, it's going to be such a huge increase, so we need to ratchet up those increases as time moves on. No different than the concept that the City Council approved last year in putting 2% for our streets to start helping with that infrastructure. So we could wait till year 6 and then increase something to the tune of 15%, or we ratchet it up 2%. So so you're right, but I think the planning process needs to start sooner than later.
The point that I'm making is that we have time through funding, through grants, through other things. Should the city be preparing for it? Yes. But we also have, if we go off of Wold, we have 6 years in which we have to start to collect those funds to get things done. So that's all I had on this slide.
But we all,
And by the way, everything moves around. I mean, there could be something else that we don't even plan on could happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
just a number of years too is estimate. You never know when something's gonna go to. You know, hopefully that numbers are right as far as how long things last.
If there's no more questions, we'll move on to the next slide. And this was an estimate based on a number of assumptions for operating the facility if the city were to run the programming component to it. Obviously, the biggest component that you're going to see there is the wages, taxes, and benefits for, you know, a program manager, 2 full-time and 2 part-time administrative staff, and some overtime, because the hours of operation would be from Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., Saturday and Sunday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. That's our assumptions that we had run this on. You can see the different categories. Most of them are all based on actual costs that have been, you know, either historical data or a comparison, like in the janitorial, because the facility hasn't been run totally wide open. The janitorial costs that we've had for the community center are primarily just for the library, so we're utilizing the 2023 actuals for the city hall, which is comparable to some degree. But those are kind of the estimates that are showing there, and then also we've got a footnote that, you know, based upon a state master contract for a contracted guard, and that's an unarmed guard, it would be $30 per hour. So for those hours, if you were to have a security person, it would be, you know, an additional cost to the operation. Again, these are assumptions that we've made, but it was trying to get us some, you know, indication of where we're at. to me, what does this tell? It says that if we were to operate this ourselves, that 886,000 or somewhere in that ballpark would be something that would be unattainable for the city. I don't believe that we would end up getting enough grants and revenue to cover that, and that would be quite a significant cost to the residents as far as a levy increase to be able to support the community center. So to me, one of the parameters that it kind of says is that we have to find partners. And that's what we've been trying to do, and that's what we did with the RFI. We didn't get too much results off of that RFI, but I think that's something that City Council has at least expressed, that there's the understanding that we really do need to have the program. If, at least what I heard last workshop was that this community center, if it were to move forward, has to have a minimum impact on our residents. I think a quote from one of the council members was that we're starting to tax our residents out of our community. So this would have an impact onto that. So to me, that's all that this is really showing us, is that we really do, to make this a viable option, is that we need to have a partner who's going to be running our programs, no different than the library today. We don't provide the programming, we provide the space. All of the programming is done by the Ramsey County Library. So any questions or thoughts on this?
Can you speak a little bit to the 5 different positions you had mentioned, that it was based off of the hours of operations, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so for administration, it says $2,000 per position. That's admin, finance, and HR indirect allocation. Is that $2,000 per position added to other operating costs that we do?
It's added to all of our enterprises. It's added to the HRA, the EDA, and it's in the form of a transfer. These categories are building owners management association categories, and so administration is the category that it falls underneath. But yes, we do transfer from each one of those enterprise funds and the HRA, EDA.
Dan, thank you for putting this together. The last line on here, am I correct in that unless we sell the building, that should be something we're planning for regardless of the outcome?
I'm sorry, what, the last line?
The 150,000 a year capital replacement, unless we sell the building, no matter what becomes of that building, that should be something the city is planning for, correct?
Yeah, I mean, a rule of thumb in the industry is that you should be putting 1.5% to 2.5% of your replacement value away on an annual basis. And that's really to take. I mean, a roof has a useful life of 20 to 25 years, so you should be accumulating the funds to be able to take it at the time that it needs to replace. Again, that's the purpose of what we put our capital improvement plans together and our financial plans and everything. So I'm just using a $6 million. If I were to really use 1.5% to 2.5% of the replacement value that Wold had on there, I believe the range would actually be $243,000 to $405,000 on an annual basis.
I just wanted to make sure that my thinking was correct, that that particular line didn't tie it to becoming community center. That line ties it to being owned by the city, whatever that building is.
It would be dedicated to the community center is how it should be, yes.
Dedicated to that building.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that would be averaging about $150,000 per year in our capital improvement plan.
That's what we would hope, yes.
That's the situation in which, okay. And so, given that it would allow us, that's 6 years to come up with figuring out a plan for $150,000 per year in the capital improvement plan.
Correct. And the appropriate way to do that is to have a complete facility assessment done, so you know what is coming up year for year, and hopefully that 150 is adequate for that.
As for the utilities, we often talk about the fiber optics and the expense of moving it or what have you. Obviously, the library operates there as well. So of the $67,000 on average over the last 3 years for the utility costs, does that also include the fiber optics?
That I cannot answer. Brian, do you?
I don't know if that was ever broken out for them or not. Just because we knew that there was no rent for them for the contract that we had in place, so I don't know if it was ever figured out for that.
So the fiber optics, does it utilize electricity? And that's a part of that bill that comes through there for the community center?
Sure it does.
So then the answer would be no, it probably isn't broken out, to my knowledge.
But it would likely be included in that figure?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, it would more than likely, yes.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I do, and I was just waiting. Oh. Dan, first off, thank you for putting this together. It's very detailed. It basically breaks almost everything out that we could think of to run it. My own opinion, I view this as the most that it could cost anybody to run it. I mean, I could go in here and take a look. Janitorial services, you said the 45.5 was basically just to clean the library?
No.
Okay, and thank you, I misunderstood.
Yeah. No, what I said is that if you were to look in the community center today, all we're paying for is the library. So that's why we utilize the 2023 City Hall costs.
Perfect, thank
It'd be a little bit more representative of it.
Well, that's a lot of money to clean the library.
Yeah.
Thank you. I did have it fixed, 34.4. IT, $6,700. I'm assuming that's a foot in insurance. What is that?
All of our departments are charged for IT services, and they're charged per full-time employee. They're charged $6,700. For part-time employee, they're charged $3,900. We have an internal service fund. And then insurance, we're estimating it to be about $6,500 on an annual basis.
So what is IT?
Information technology?
So where's the $6,700, 67 per person for?
Like Metro INET, all of our computers, computer replacement.
So that's based off of the 5 positions that are there?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I was.
Yeah, so if you were to take, 3 positions at 6,700, that's 20,100. If you take 2 at 39, it's 78. Add the 6,500, and you'll come to the 34.4.
Perfect. Thank you.
Couldn't.
IT was IT to me, and it's like, what do you mean per person? I had never seen it broken out, so thank you.
That's how it's being allocated right now through the internal service fund.
And I do like the fact how you break everything out from, mowing, snow removal, parking lot, irrigation, et cetera, as well as, the capital replacement funds. When we look at Casey, when we look at Housy, when we look at this building, do we break it out the exact same way? Or is this just something that's been set up separately to take a look?
No, those haven't been set up to look at that way. They certainly could. Again, in a prior life that I lived, this is how I would do everything, because we'd always compare everything to BOMA standards to know if we were running a facility, how efficient we were running a facility, kind of benchmarks to do it. So these are the categories that they utilized. And so it's very helpful because you can go out to a number of resources and find out what costs are per square foot, and then you can kind of do an estimate to be able to build a budget. And obviously, we're building a budget pretty much from scratch for this, you know, so yeah, so the format actually works well.
So some of these to me are additives. We are the snow removal, the mowing, parking lot irrigation. Those are already being covered by what exists today.
I'm not going to necessarily disagree with that. It's a category. We can definitely take the $9,600 off of that.
No, and I'm not looking to nitpick, Dan. Again, I just want to thank you for the detail. I just want to make sure I've got clarity, so I appreciate it. Are we doing a capital replacement fund on the current building that we sit in now?
The answer is absolutely no, and that's why I've been pushing it for the time that I've been here. That's why the importance of that capital improvement plan has been so significant. So the day when I walk out, hopefully I've got it set up, and we're getting very close to that. And that's why this facility assessment is so critical that we're going to see, because I believe we are way, way, way away from where we need to be for funding. No different than, you know, the infrastructure on the streets. So that's kind of my thing that I've been kind of saying, and hopefully, fingers crossed, they're to deliver us a draft here shortly, and we'll be able to present something to City Council at the next meeting.
Because this building's, what, 20? Close to 20?
And so is the Public Works. That's what's got me really, really scared, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I fully support doing that, because it's scary to not have it, because a lot of that is why we're in the situation we're in right now with the community center, is that nobody planned for 20 years down the road. We probably wouldn't be having these types of conversations if we had done that. So thank you for doing that, and I look forward to having it being presented. But again, same thing. I look at a lot of these things on here as this is, I don't want to call it worst case scenario, but this encapsulates everything that could possibly be there, with the exception of the catastrophic things that we hadn't planned for. So the number could dramatically come down depending on what, you know, how it's staffed, depending on how the budgets are taken a look at. So the only point that I want to make is this is directional, at my opinion, what is potentially hopefully the highest possible scenario available.
And I agree, and that's why the comment that I said, really the purpose of what this is showing is that we couldn't afford to do this at $886,000, and that what's the biggest line that you're going to see in there, and that's your staffing.
Yep.
So that means what? It means we can't staff it to run the program of the facility. We have to find that partner.
And predicated upon if there were tenants, if the building goes forward, you know, in the private sector, the leases that I've entered into, there was a dollar amount per square foot set aside. So it's not funded by the owner of the building, it's funded by the tenant. You know, so I take a look at some of those interior costs. Utilities, again, some of those could potentially would be funded by the tenant, depending on how the lease read. You know, there's a lot of things. So I just view this as like hopefully what could be the cap.
Yeah. Yeah, no, this operating budget not necessarily have any, I would say it does not have tenant improvements to give to a tenant coming in. But there's different ways that you can structure any lease. I think you're fully aware of that, because you can, yeah, but that's a different part of the discussion. Typically, tenants do offer some sort of tenant improvement as part of their rental rate. So if you go out and look, you know, for suburbs and what rental rates are going for, there usually is some sort of amount in there. It may not be adequate enough, and the leasee has to pick up the rest of the tab.
I don't have any additional comments or questions. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it.
Can you expand a little bit on the other operating expenses?
It's just kind of for like miscellaneous, I mean, office supplies, da-da-da, different types of components that could be, you know, needed into, you know, any operating budget. I mean, if you look at any one of our operating budgets, there's, well, there's usually a lot more than 7,300, depending on the budget, but it's just having something in there for those other things that just don't necessarily fall into those categories. And again, these categories are BOMA categories. And there's, you can see there's a footnote, it references a source that, you know, that I purchased to be able to get some sort of cost per square foot numbers. So we weren't doing this totally blind.
Okay, thank you.
If there's no other questions, I'll move to the next. And again, you know, we had the now current director of Ramsey County Libraries, Peng Vang, here to kind of talk about, and these are some of, from her presentation, just some of the points that she had brought up, the, you know, number of visits, even though I believe that 2023 is not necessarily totally representative of true annual because Maplewood was closed during that time, and so we got additional traffic at the North St. Paul Library. But the number of books that were checked out, computer hours, you know, they had asked, you know, people, what are they looking for? Obviously, they were, you know, it was nice to see that they're looking for extended hours because they do have limited hours at this site. Looking for some additional space for teachers, mentors, tutors, and so forth. We did meet with Ramsey County's Director of Property Management and Peng Vang, and I had a discussion with her, and they are looking at additional square footage than they're currently at. So they're looking at like a total of 5,000 square feet. Part of the reason is that they would end up having additional kind of office spaces so they could have more private meetings. I had mentioned this before. Ramsey County has quite extensively changed their model. And they're changing a lot of their facilities. I think the Ramsey County Government Center East on the river is going to be going up for sale if it hasn't been up for sale. They moved over to their Metro Square as their kind of their downtown service center. But they moved into, more importantly, kind of like a navigational type of model where they can go out and meet with the public at different locations. I know at the Maplewood Library, there's hours that they actually publish that they'll have social workers and other services that'll be provided. And that's kind of the concept that they were looking at by having some additional services put here at the North St. Paul Library by having these office private areas for meetings and so forth. Any questions on this?
I do have one question. And I don't believe it's going to create a huge impact upon no matter what's decided here. Do we have any way to verify or check their number of visits? For the amount of hours they're open, this many visits, they're saying they average 29 people an hour they're open for every single hour they're open. I've been to the library, and I'm seeing a disconnect here on this data that I'm having trouble explaining.
When she was here, she indicated that they have a counter, but that's the only way that they were able to.
So is it double counting?
We don't know that, and she
Okay.
didn't have an answer for that.
But averaging 30 people for every single hour they're open seems to me high and unattainable for anything I've seen there.
And we told her that when she was here. All she indicated was that it was just the counter that was counting those individuals.
And I did send a message to Ryan to see if we could maybe get from July, the half year so far, just to kind of get an idea if it was an anomaly or not.
It's my understanding they also host a lot of the schools in this area, like some of the home schools and the alternative schools at the library. They have like library days, so there's probably some foot traffic from classrooms. That's what I remember from our conversation as well.
Any other comments, questions on this slide? Going once, going twice. The next part, just to kind of go over again the results of the RFI for partnerships. We received one completed submittal from Hype Volleyball Club. It would generate $60,000 per year in revenue. There were 9 additional phone calls. Again, a number of them were volleyball. There was the Ashland Theater. There was a side dance school. Ramsey County's in there as additional space that was just mentioned, and so forth. So there was some interest, yet from a formal RFI component to it, there was only one that was a complete submittal onto that. Any questions, comments on this slide?
And so with the 9 received phone calls for interest, what was the communication and the information from those conversations? Were people expressing simply just interest, or was there dialogue about what kind of programming they would offer, financials, et cetera? It's my understanding that RFIs can be reopened and explored more. I'm not sure if folks were referred to the RFI.
Brian, do you want to answer?
Information I got from them some were just individuals looking for time to use a volleyball group. Some were looking to possibly even start up their own volleyball group. Some of the questions that were asked as far as rent goes, it was uncertain of, what their full ask was going to be. Some people had intentions of renting it a few nights, and if it could get something to take off, maybe even start a league. So it was kind of all over the place of anywhere from wanting to do a lease, whether it was a theater group or here and there with volleyball use.
So looking at this list, it sounds like there's some missing components of what an RFI could, like what we have asked, and then what information that we have currently. We're missing some information from some of these groups.
And several of the groups referenced that they saw an ad for that information, but called as opposed to turning in a packet.
We actually did a tour of Ashland as well.
We did
I was over there.
many of these.
Yep, he wanted to show around.
For the organizations that were initially engaged with WOLD, were they made aware of the RFI?
I think on the RFI, it indicated all of the, who was contacted, and how the solicitation went out. And I don't know that off the top of my head. I know that you had given some suggestions and that were incorporated into, the communication.
I don't think anybody walked down 7th Avenue again and went back into the same stores because I think that first walk of downtown was prior to the RFI going out, so I don't know that was put back out to all of them individually,
Any other questions on this, comments?
Yeah, I just think for the RFI that there's a lot more information that would be needed from our partners and potential partners and those that have expressed partnership that we've previously engaged with. yeah, that's just something I really think that we need more information on, that we would need to make a decision on whether a partnership or whose partnerships make this a viable option.
I absolutely agree with that. The problem is we didn't get that results when we went out and advertised and did that. But I absolutely agree that, yeah, we need more information, because a partnership's the only way this is actually going to work and have a minimum impact on our residents, so.
Yeah, I think, like, aside from, you know, maybe posting it once, that this could be an opportunity for us to open it and engage a little bit more. I'm not sure the capacity of staff to do all of this. Because there's 9 here, but then there's 20 others that have been engaged in the past.
Any other questions or comments? And then the state grant terms, you know, $4.5 million of the grant. I think last workshop, I think everybody was agreed on that, you know, they were comfortable with the 25 years. There's still uncertainty of the outcome if the city defaults. I asked the question, got a response about a week later that basically said he had talked to somebody else in the office, and they said to talk to our city attorney. Didn't give much clarification or comfort to me. And then at this time, it must be used for the current facility and approved the Community Multicultural Outreach Center. That's what we know. I do want to bring to everybody's attention, and part of the reason why I asked about the default is because in this grant boilerplate, it talks about the remedy if there's a default. It talks in section 2.06B, basically that the state can demand the grant recipient to, you know, basically return the funds. Again, it doesn't talk about if it's after a number of years, you know, is it prorated and so forth. Obviously, there's a section that's below there that says if the, and I'll read what it says. It says if the grant recipient does not repay any portion of the amount specified under that section 2.06B within 30 days of demand by either the state entity or by either state entity or the budget, then such amount may, unless precluded by law, be taken off or offset against any aids or any monies that the grant recipient is entitled to receive from the state of Minnesota. So if we were given 30-day notice, we'd have a very difficult time to turn around and get $4.5 million together. But on an annual basis, you know, they could, for the next couple of years, they could take away our local government aid. I believe they can take away both our police and fire aid, and then they would be able to take our street maintenance aid. Right now, those accumulate to about $2 million, a little over $2 million that we utilize within our budgets. You know, I know there's, I know one of the council members always said, can you translate that into kind of a, what would that be as a levy impact? That would be like a 27% levy increase to cover that $2 million loss in our budgets. So it's just something to be aware of, and that's where my concern of that default needed to be clarified. And again, we didn't get much of an answer from the state on that.
Can I clarify, I was not comfortable with the 25 years. You said we were comfortable.
Oh,
as a
sure.
group, so I stated I wasn't.
Okay.
Just want to be on the record on that.
I also wasn't here, so. Just letting you know,
Okay.
it's not a full group.
All right. Understand. Take that back.
Thank you. I'll just make sure.
Any other questions on this?
Thanks for digging, looking into that.
And then again, I mentioned earlier that there were some other options that were given by Wold. And the option A was to demo the community center and keep the library intact. They did a very rough estimate on these, and it would come to the tune of like $3.1 million to do that. Option B was to demo the entire community center, relocate the library to some existing space to be determined. That was a cost of 1.3. And then option C was to demo the entire community center and construct a new library. And that would be $4.8 million. This is estimates from 2022. This is all the backup or anything that was given that's in the narrative that's below those options. Just for, you know, trying to give all of the information that staff has received and the options. So, you know, there's definitely different options that the city can look at if they decide not to move forward with the grant and the community center. You know, and if the city council desires to keep the library as an amenity to the city, there's, you know, a possibility. There's a property that's on the corner of Margaret and 7th Street that's a vacated building that's approximately 5,000 square feet that I think the owner would be willing to lease for something that's pretty reasonable. So, I mean, there's options, not just in the community center. And to me, that's what these options that they had run through back in 2022 kind of give an indication for.
The way in which I read this is actually to demo is more costly to us as a city. If the gap is 1.7, then a demo, option A, would be 3.1 million.
Well, there's two demo options. The first one was to demo everything except for the library,
Yeah,
which
option A.
just because of how you would have to do that surgically,
Right.
the cost goes way up. So you would never do an option A.
Sure. And then option B, there would be about a $500,000 or $400,000 difference in what we're looking at in terms of a gap, and that's demo the entire community center, relocate the library to an existing space. And you had referenced a corner building that is a potential tenant. I guess, does that cost also include that tenant rental, that space?
no.
Because we don't own the building.
No, so, you know, depending on which number you want to look at, that $7.3 million figure, and I'm just going to use it. Yes, I know you can take the first 6 years of options and be at about the same amount of the grant, but you're talking about the $1.7 million gap. You also have to add on that there's going to be operational costs. So we looked at the operational. Yes, the high side was about $886,000. If you demo and you relocate the library, your ongoing costs are only the lease. The lease is somewhere underneath, well, I think it was about $46,000 a year. Is that something that the city would have to pay forever and ever? I would say no. I would say that at some point in time, again, and that's going through the library lease, you would have to have a discussion with Ramsey County on that. But at some point in time, at least in the conversation that we had with the county, they anticipate at some point in time that they will end up having to pay a lease, even if they were in their current facility, or in the current facility at the community center. That dollar amount was never discussed. But $46,000 on approximately 5,000 square feet is a pretty reasonable, you know, cost per square foot. So, but obviously, if you demo here, it's less capital than the 7.3, the 1.7, plus the operational costs are a lot less for the city, even if the city had to pick up the full entire lease. But again, these are just other options that were posed.
Sure, yeah, I'm just kind of trying to observe, like, just respond to what I'm seeing here. And then the 4.8 million option C would be demo the entire community center and then construct a new library. Obviously, that is a really high cost as well. It looks like $4.8 million there. And that's only retaining the library in all of these scenarios, but the community center would be absent. And so that would only give us just the library resources. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And it says that these estimates are from 2022, so since we've had our conversation with Wold, they've changed the deferred maintenance plan from about 2.5 million to 7. What we're looking at now, are these reflective of inflation and all those other changes in
The note says
costs?
they're estimates from 2022, so the answer would be no. And again, these were just to show that there were other options that were presented. Staff is delivering and trying to be as transparent as possible and giving you all the information that's out there. That's all we're trying to do tonight.
Yeah, I appreciate it very much. I'm just trying to digest this and
Yep.
make sure that I'm understanding it correctly.
Yep. Any other questions, comments on this?
Those estimates you just went over, I just got confused with the last statement. Where did they come from? Were they from Wold, or were they from an internal city?
They were from Wold.
Okay.
They, email they gave to the city. Actually, they gave it back when John Stark was the city manager in 2022.
Thank you.
And again, there's no detail as far as how they came up with those estimates, and so I mean, there'd be so many questions that would be asked on any of these things. Yeah. So what have we learned through this?
Can we pause just a minute?
Sure
before we
can.
move on? Because your last comment was very valid. We don't know what the details are. Those were a lot of my questions revolved around there. Does it cover cost of moving, the generator? Does it, all the fiber optics? We don't know if that's included in there or not.
My understanding is that those two items were,
Okay.
because they always were aware of those
Okay.
two items that needed to be done.
So my only question, whoops, my computer just died, is option B. If we could look at, very similar to how the financials were put together with what could potentially be the highest liability, could we look at what that would look like? I'm assuming the library would probably want us to pay to relocate their stuff. I would expect that there would potentially be a build-out in the property that we'd be moving into, or the library would be moving into. I assume that there'd be a whole bunch, back to my IT question, there'd be a whole bunch of IT costs to move all their computers, and the lease. If we could look at, and then whatever other ancillary things you could come up with, I would just be curious to know what that would roll to, not necessarily knowing what the 1.3 encompasses, other than dropping the building and grass seed.
And we'd find that out
Yeah.
too from
Yeah.
Wold.
So that would help me. It would help kind of just paint a better picture.
So we can see what we can do on that one.
Thanks, Dan.
And we'll move to the next one. What have we learned? Right now, that 7.3 million versus the 5.3 in grants, that the deferred maintenance on the community centers higher than the grant funds. That to minimize the financial impacts on residents, future programming and operation of the community center will need to be achieved through partnerships. And I think that kind of proves out with what we've seen so far. I think the library plays an important role in our community. I think we've learned that the acceptance of the grant will increase financial risk to our community, and part of it is that if we don't get that answered as far as what constitutes that default and what would be the repayment component back to the state if that event had occurred. And then there are other options for the city to consider. And, you know, those three options were there. You know, I've always looked at it from the standpoint of, from what we've seen on the, you know, from the results of the RFI, and I'm not going to disagree that they're not fully conclusive, and that there's not more work that could be done to flush out and try to get more information. But what we've been seeing is that the gymnasium seems to be the bigger attraction of the area in the community center, but it doesn't generate much revenue. You've got yourself a library that is providing programming that is very much underneath what the grant application had given. So maybe it is that we would end up having to get you know, legislation to approve it, but maybe it's a whole different new facility someplace, and it's a smaller square footage. You know, outside of the relocation costs of the fiber and the generator and so forth. If you were to look at a 10,000 square foot facility, you should probably be able to build that somewhere between $400 to $450 a square foot. So you're looking at $4 to $4.5 million, which the grant funds would then end up covering. Obviously, your operational costs on a 10,000 square foot facility versus a 33,000 square foot facility would be less also. So there's, at the end of the day, there's other options. But all of that at the end of the day comes down to what is the city council's goal and vision of the programming component that they want within this city council, or within this community center. And that has not become clear to staff, and that's part of what staff struggles with, is what are we really looking for as far as that. And that's why there is an estimate here of or a draft of an RFP. Definitely the city council can make the decision to issue that, looking at that. So I'm going to kind of quickly move to that since we're at 6:17.
I've got a couple of points I want to make on what have we learned. A potential friendly amendment to the second to the last bullet point. Acceptance of this grant will increase. Acceptance of the grant may increase. We don't know, just to your point, what it's going to be. And the other bullet point that I would like to add is not accepting the grant causes a financial liability to the city as well, anywhere from 1.3 to 4 point, whatever the dollar amount was, $1 million. We don't have an answer for those funds either.
Duly noted.
Thanks, Dan.
You asked for an estimate of a feasibility study. This is a very rough estimate, and I'll tell you how I got to it. I was fortunate. The RFP that's drafted, a lot of it is coming from a recently issued RFP for a feasibility study from the city of Hibbing, Minnesota, which I think was very, very well written, and hopefully it hits on the components that City Council is looking at. I contacted their director of Parks and Recreation, and they're paying about $80,000 for their feasibility study. They have a bigger facility that has ice rinks, which we don't have, yet the services that are being identified are pretty much going to end up having to be done, and it's not really a balancing of the number of square feet that you're looking at. You're still going to have to go and gather all the same information. So I threw an estimate, hopefully it would be less than that 80,000, somewhere in the range of $45,000 to $60,000 is probably what this feasibility study would cost. But we wouldn't know the exact until after we went out for a formal RFP process onto it. And And the draft is attached, just for sake of time, at 6:19. If you have any comments or suggestions, if you could send them to me, I can get them incorporated and changed. And City Council will have one more opportunity at the next City Council meeting to see that final RFP before it goes out and actually to make the decision if they want to issue it or not.
The RFP added after the initial packet was released?
No,
I didn't see it.
no. Do you have the packet?
Request for proposal, multipurpose community center feasibility. Thank you, I found it. It was way underneath all the old stuff. Thank you.
I also want to give a shout out to Ava, one of our newer employees, who reviewed it for me and cleaned it up and made it look much better than I had it. So thank you.
Wonderful job. One thing that I find really important for us to consider is absolutely the financial aspect and the community impact, the economic impacts of a community center. I think that's one thing that's not yet captured, but I'll sure share that in the scope of services. But I just wanted to state that we've not had that much conversation in general about what is the impact for our residents, not just in the short term, but in the long term, and what the trade-offs are there. Well, thank you for your work. I will look forward to reviewing more of this and sending stuff your way.
Thanks, Dan, appreciate it.
And the last part here, and then we do have a couple of minutes if we want to give any time for the public to have any things. Just because it hasn't been clear and the city councils have changed after the city council had made the decision to not sell the community center. We will be bringing two items to the city council next meeting. One's to bring an item to city council not to accept the grant. Again, if city council turns that down, the next item will be to bring it to issue the RFP for a feasibility study. Just to give you what our next steps will be. And then if we want to give any time for public comments.
Sure. Do you have something?
I do, please. So next council meeting, we're not going to have a full council, so it's not going to be fair to make a vote like that on the next one. And then also a reminder that the first meeting in August is canceled because it's National Night Out. So this will be we're into the second meeting in August.
Thank you. Anybody in public want to have a minute? If not,
Come on up. You showed up. Come on.
Elaine Barton, 2021 Burke Avenue East. Yeah, I feel compelled to because you spent all that time. And this is the first meeting now for a couple of meetings that there's been time to even take any input from the public. But I mean, the one thing I'm left with is kind of a wrap-up comment the finance director made of what they're looking for is a vision of the programming that the council feels the community members need is really the way I look at it as well. So I certainly appreciate the concept of an RFP, but to use the same generic language as was in the application, I'm not certain that the results you're going to get won't be the same thing. Well, you know, maybe we'll do a volleyball court and a basketball, there's some sports here, but that doesn't get at the purpose, as I see it, the underlying purpose of the whole grant application in the first place. So I'd encourage you to somehow come up with some ideas on your own of what you're really specifically looking for, if anything. I did notice banquet center in the draft RFP, which startled me because I thought, where did that come from? So, again, that's just my input. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Elaine.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks again, Dan. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. I thank you very much for your patience as went through all of that stuff. I'm off for the rest of the week, so I want to wish everybody a very happy and safe 4th of July.
Thanks.
Likewise.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it. All right. Nothing else? Other business, anything, city manager? We can call for adjournment?
Nothing more.
Appreciate it. Can I get a motion for adjournment, please? So moved. Councilmember Norby.
Second.
Second, Councilmember Cole. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you all, and see you in 4 minutes.